In this video, I want to share a perspective that I hope will provide some reassurance and comfort to any photographer who feels like they're stuck in a rut, like maybe they're not creating photos that they enjoy, or maybe they feel like they're not progressing as quickly as they'd like. Because let's face it, we all have times where we feel like we're not on top form, and it doesn't matter whether you've been doing photography for 5 months or 5 years. That feeling is fairly universal. It happens to all photographers, and it has absolutely nothing to do with experience or how far along you are in your journey as a photographer in terms of your learning and your development. And perhaps experience just gives us the tools to be able to move past that mindset more easily, but it's inevitable that those feelings will one day return again. But what if those feelings are necessary for us to grow as photographers? As frustrating as it may be to feel demoralized, especially as creatives and especially for beginner photographers, those feelings can be quite uncomfortable, but often they indicate that something needs to change. And perhaps those feelings just remind us that there's something that we're doing in our photography that we could maybe learn from or do slightly better, or maybe just refine moving forward. I think it's important to listen to those feelings and try and embrace them, because photography, along with any artistic or creative pursuit, it's not something that can be mastered. So there's no way to avoid those feelings of disappointment and potential inadequacy from time to time, but nor should we actually want to perfect it or at least master it, because surely that would take the fun out of it. I mean, if you could create perfect photo after perfect photo time and time again, eventually I guess you would just lose the enjoyment and the thrill of it. Surely the thing that keeps us moving forward as photographers and keeps us going out with our camera is that anticipation, and it's the unknown. You realize that there's an inherent unpredictability in what we do as photographers, and there's so much that's outside of our control as much as we would try to control it. Things like the weather, the fact that the things that we photograph, the world around and outside of our lens is constantly changing and constantly evolving. And when you understand that, it makes the idea of mastering photography and mastering this art form feel somewhat futile. But I firmly believe that that realization unlocks a door to a more rewarding relationship with our art and our photography and the work that we create. It just forces you to accept that not everything will go your way all of the time. There's a quote by Albert Einstein that has always stuck with me that I think applies to this whole topic. He said that the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. For example, when you first start learning how to use a camera, you might think that there's a ceiling to how much you can learn, and that's only because you've not yet experienced enough to understand the scale of what is possible. You might look at your camera and see a finite number of things to learn. There's only so many dials and modes and buttons to learn. So you might think that once you've understood what all of those do, then you can go out and take good photos. And yes, there does come a point where you can quote unquote master the fundamentals of the technical proficiency needed to carry out a certain skill, in this instance that skill being taking a photo. And you realize that there is kind of like a binary element to the mechanics of photography. For example, if you have a wide aperture, that's going to create a shallow depth of field, and likewise if you want to avoid motion blur in your images, then shooting at a high shutter speed is going to mitigate against that. But the mechanics of taking that photo don't actually equate to the creation of a compelling photo. It's just one part of the process. There's another component at play here that is crucial and can't be overlooked. So let's circle back to Einstein one more time. He also said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there will ever be to know and understand." The idea of imagination, the ability to uniquely and infinitely create from a well of infinite, limitless possibilities, is what makes photography impossible to master. There's no definitive endpoint to our learning because there is no definitive end to the number of ideas and creative avenues that we can explore. A prime example of this is if you were to take 3 photographers and place them in front of the same subject and tell them to photograph the scene and to edit their photo, you would get 3 completely unique interpretations of that same seen in that potentially same image. That freedom of imagination brings with it an undeniable amount of subjectivity. And for some people who are just getting into photography or art or any creative pursuit might struggle with that idea of subjectivity because it is kind of inherently ambiguous. There is no rules and there's no way to really define what is good or what is bad. But that also brings with it an enormous amount of freedom. Because there are no rules, we can basically create whatever we want. And imagination, or creativity, if you want to call it that, is vital because that is the component in the photographic process that enables you to create the photos and the work that you do. That idea of technical knowledge, how to use your camera and all the buttons and the modes, is merely there just to facilitate the capture of that idea and that thing that you pre-visualize whenever you look at a scene. It's important to remember that good ideas are the things that make good photos. And that's why when you experience these spells of feeling demoralized by your photography and feeling like you're stuck in a rut and that you're not progressing as quickly as you'd like to, it's always important during those times to not fixate on the technical aspects of creating photographs. There's no point in thinking that you need to upgrade your camera or you need to get a new piece of gear in order to get you out of that. And whilst they certainly can, I think your energy is definitely best spent focusing more on that imagination part of the puzzle, that idea of creativity. Take some time to find things that inspire you to create, whether that's just discovering a new photographer and understanding their work, or buying some photo books. Whatever that might be, that is always going to be the thing that is worthwhile to pursue because it's going to completely change your outlook and your perception, not only on your work, but on the future work that you might create. Because when you're out in the field and you're out with your camera, it's going to completely change the way you look at things. It's like a car, it'll coast along and get you from point A to point B without much maintenance for a pretty considerable amount of time, but there will come a time where you will need to service that car and change the oil to keep it working efficiently. And the same can be said for us as photographers. If we want to keep moving forward with our photography, then we need to put some fresh ideas into our tank to keep us motivated and to keep us working and heading in the right direction. And to circle back to that Einstein quote about the more we learn, the more we realize what we don't know, by going on this process of feeding ourselves with new ideas, our tastes are going to inevitably change. You know, it's going to offer us some fresh perspective and it's going to change our preferences when it comes to what we like in photos, both from what we consume and what we like to shoot. Looking back at your early work can offer some great perspective in this instance, because if you look back at your early photos and you see things that you would do differently now, whether that's through editing or how you would compose a shot, then that's a good indicator that you're growing, because you have to remember that when you took that photo all those years ago, that was probably the best photo that you'd ever taken. But now that you look back, you see all the flaws because you've developed and you've learned and you've experienced more. That idea of perspective is so valuable in any art form, especially photography, where progress and success are notoriously difficult to define. Remember that your progress and your success can only ever be defined by you. And that idea of progress and learning never really truly ends, because the more we consume and the more ideas we have, the more things it gives us to chase. Some of those ideas will be good and some probably won't be that good, but with every single throw of the dice, you're giving yourself the opportunity to gain some experience, and you need to sort of see out those bad ideas, because it's those that are going to really teach you so much about where you're at and where you want to go. So if you ever do feel frustrated by your photography at times, then just know that you're not alone. And whilst that mindset is potentially demoralizing, there are plenty of avenues out of that way of thinking. You just have to keep creating and keep following your curiosity, and it'll take you down a different path. The final thing to remember is that there is no final destination when it comes to photography. And because of that, we just really have to make the most of the journey and really try to enjoy it.